Hi everybody, this is Professor West again, and welcome back to Java Programming. Last time we discussed switch case statements, as you can see here. I call them switch case statements because some people call them switch statements, some people call them case statements, and as long as you understand that the two are the same, I mean the switch is part of the case and the case is part of the switch, as long as you understand that, then you're fine. But I tend to call them both when I'm teaching because that way it gets in your head that they're linked together, so no matter which one you use or which one you hear, you understand that it's the same thing. This week, we're going to be talking about functions, also called methods. I don't know why they decided to have two different names, but somebody decided to call it a method and somebody else decided to call it a function. That's okay, as long as you understand that a function is a method and a method is a function. So if you hear somebody use one term or the other, you understand what they're talking about. So up until now, we have dealt with the main function. All of our code has been in the main function. Everything between this curly brace here, or bracket, and this one down here. So everything has been in the main function. And here's the name, main. You see it. So what happens when the program runs? As I hinted on before, the program's going to go through, it's going to import all the code that it needs to import from your import statements. Then it's going to come into the class, it's going to find the main method, and it's going to start running line by line. That's how it knows what to do. When it gets to a loop or a switch or an if statement or whatever, it starts branching off and doing different things. But every one of them is going to come to this main function and start running. What we're going to do now is create additional functions. Now, the computer will only run what's in main by default. So it would start running here, it would come on down, and eventually it would get to the end of the main, and it would close. It doesn't care if you have other functions in the program, unless you actually tell it to care by calling or referencing those methods. So, let's get rid of all of this stuff. Well, let's get rid of some of this stuff. That'll make it a little easier to understand. Okay. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come after this main function, and I'm going to hit the enter key a few times. That way I can have some room to start my next function here. Remember, it has to be outside of the main function. It has to be after that closing brace. But it also has to be inside of the class, so it has to be before the last brace, which corresponds to this one here. No function can be within another function, but it has to be within the class. So I'm going to come right here, and let me before I get to this, let's talk about the parts of a function. Okay, so take a look at the main function here. It says public static void main string args. Let's break down what that's doing real quick. First, the public keyword. Public is exactly how it sounds. It's like a public park. Everybody can go to that park. This is a public function. Every other function can access it. So, additional choices could be private, for example, meaning that you could call the function, but you couldn't access specific things in it. So, don't worry about all that for now. We'll just use public and keep going. Static means that certain things in the function could be accessed before certain objects in the class can be accessed. It's one of those things that we'll have to get to a little more later also. So for now, just trust me on this. We'll put public and static. Those are going to be on every function we create from now on. And the next word we come to is void. Void doesn't always have to be void. Let's see. When you call a function and you have it do something, and I'll show you in just a minute what I'm talking about, but sometimes you'll send a value over to it, and maybe you'll send two numbers and tell it to add them together, and then it'll send the answer back. If it's sending something back, then whatever type it's sending back would be here. If it's sending an integer back, then it wouldn't be a void, it would be an int. this is telling us that whatever calls this main function won't be sending a value to the main function. So then there's the name of the function, and then these are called parameters. These are the values that we're going to send when we call that function. So when this function is called, something could be sent to it. In this case, a string could be sent to the main function. But when the main function ends, it would not return a value. It just ends. So let's give it a try, because I know that can be a little confusing. And let's just do one of our own. Let's say public static int. I'm going to call it add method. And I'm going to say int x, comma, int y. And then I'm going to have an open brace, which automatically puts my close. So what I've told it here is very simple. I'm going to create this. I'm going to have this method be part of my program. Remember, it has to be outside of the main class, the main method, but it also had to be before the end of the class. What this is going to do is, because it's public, it can be accessed from everywhere in the program. When I call my add method, I'm going to send up to 2 variables. And the first one is going to be accepted as x, and the second one is going to be accepted as y. When this method ends, it's going to return 1 integer value. So let's do something simple. Let's say int total, and then I'm going to say total equals x plus y. Okay, so all I'm telling it to do, if I send the numbers 2 and 7, then 2, since it was first, would go to x. X would now have the value of 2, and y would now have the value of 7. Total equals 2 plus 7, which is 9. So my variable total now has the value of 9. And then I would say return total. Now this is very important. You can only return one thing. I could send a dozen. I could send more than that if I want to the function. But a function can only return one value. Now, wherever I called it from, because I'm sending back an integer, we'll have to be able to understand what an integer is and accept it. So, let's say, for the sake of argument, let me comment this out. I don't want to delete it because we may use it in a minute. I'm not sure. Okay, let's say int num1 equals 3, int num2 equals 14, and int answer equals 0. So I've created 3 variables, num1, num2, and answer. Now, inside my main function still, I'm going to call the add method function. And I'm going to simply say answer equals, because I want whatever is returned to be assigned to answer. Add method. Oops. Notice I did not capitalize it because I messed up. Add method. And then I'm going to send num1, comma, num2, and a semicolon. So this will send, num1 is 3, so it'll send 3, which will go to the first integer here, which is x, so x will now have the value of 3. Num2 will have the value of 14, so it'll go to y. And then it'll come down here, and it'll say, oh, okay, 3 plus 14 is 17, so total is 17. It'll return, and in essence, this will be replaced by the number 17, and it would be like saying answer equals 17. Let's do a quick system.out.println command, and we'll just say answer, so it prints the answer. And we'll save and run. And, oh, there's 17. That's all it did. So what happened was, the program came to my main function. It started to run. We assigned these values. Then here, I called the method, add method. I sent those values to it. After the calculations were performed, it returned here, because it always returns to where it's called from. Answer now equals that, and I outputted the line. This is very important. There's a couple things here that I wanted to point out that I haven't actually discussed yet. I gave it the name add method because I wanted it to add my two variables together, and it's a method. Whenever you're naming your methods or your functions, whatever, you want to give it a name that specifically tells what is going to happen in this function or in this method. So you don't want 15 things to happen in this method, because then you'd have trouble naming it. The standard rule is if you have too much stuff going on that you can't give it a specific name, then you need to have more than one function or method so that you can. Because remember, you can have as many functions as you want. You can have 1,000 functions in this program. You can have more than 1,000. You can have 10,000. It doesn't matter. Each one is separate. If I have another one here, I could have, let me go ahead and do one. Let's say public static int test method. Let's say int a comma int b. And what should we have this method do? Let's have this method, let's just have this method display something. So system.out.println quote, the test method is being ran here or now. Okay, so all I'm going to do is have it output that's going to happen, and I'm going to have a return with nothing after it. Oh, except I have to have the oops, and I'm going to have a void because I don't want to actually return a value. I didn't think I needed that. Okay, so let's say here I just say test method 3,4. So I'm going to send the variables 3 and 4 to it, but I'm not actually going to do anything with it. I'm just going to have it print this line that tells you that that method's running, and then it's going to return. So let's have a couple more lines of code here. I just copy and paste that to make it a little simpler. This is in the add method. And this is back in the add method. I'm just going to do this to show you what's happening. So what's going to happen is, just like before, this method's going to call this one. This one's going to start running. It's going to have X and Y. And then right here, it's going to stop. It's just basically going to pause this program. It's going to output this line, and then it's going to pause this method. And it's going to call this method, the test method, which is going to come down here. It's going to run these lines of code, and then it's going to return up here, and it's going to pick up where it left off. It's going to unpause and run the rest of these lines. Let's watch it work. There you go. This is in the add method. The text method being ran now. This is back in the add method, and then here's our answer. So all I've done is I've called the add method from the main, and I called the test method from the add method. Returned it back, it returned it back. That's all we're doing. And guys, it really is about that simple. So there's one other thing that I wanted to mention real quick. It's called function overloading, or method overloading, depending on which programming language you're using. What that means is sometimes you'll be in a position where you're going to send, in this case, this one's going to accept 2 integers. But what if you don't know for sure that it's going to accept 2 integers? What if there's also a chance it could accept 2, I don't know, doubles or floats? So you have a second method with the exact same name. It's set up exactly the same, only one or more of the variables in it are different. So here, what's going to happen is, when this program calls test method, it's going to send the values 3 and 4. The computer's going to look at this and say, hey, we have 2 different programs that are 2 different functions that are called test method. This one, we're sending 2 integers. This one accepts an integer and an integer. This one accepts a float and an integer. Which one is the closest to what we need and will work? Well, since these are 2 integers and this is 2 integers, this one's the closest because it's exactly right. And so this method would run and this one would not. However, if I wanted to send 3.74 and 4, then it would now, it's giving me a problem because I told it a minute ago that these are integers, but I wanted to show you anyway. Now it would say, hey, this one's a float, it can handle 3.74, whereas this one cannot. So this would, or I'm sorry, whereas this one could not. So this would be the method that's ran and returned. So it's just something for you to play around with. You can have a lot of different functions with the same name. I've seen programs that had 5 or 10 different variations of the same exact method. And that's just something that we do sometimes. And I don't personally like it because it's a little sloppy. The reason I say that is I'm not the one that's deciding which of these methods is going to run. The computer is. I like to be specific. I like to be the one that tells it what's going to happen. So here in this example, I had 3 and 4. Remember I told you that you could call the same method over and over and over? Well, what if here I decided, you know what, now I need to call test method, and I want 2.378 comma and 4. You know, so my point is, you can call the same method over and over and over, and each time it's going to do the same thing. But in this case, the first time it accesses it, it would call this method because it's the closest. The second time it would have to call this one because A can have a decimal place and this one cannot. So I'm just going to get rid of that. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this method. And I want to show you what I meant when I said you could have it do more than one. Let me get rid of these lines of code now, since you understand what's going on. And I'm not even going to have this method in there anymore. Let's just get rid of that altogether. So now we're back to where we started with the one add method. It's going to accept 2 variables, add them together, and return the total. So here I'm saying answer equals add method num1 num2. But what if I did something like this? And now I'm going to say 2 and 54, 17, 55, 22, 19. So what's going to happen is it's going to run this program. It's going to come down. The program's going to come down here. It's going to call the add method function. It's going to send 3 and 14. Just like it did before. It's going to add them together and it's going to return the total, and it's going to save it as answer. Then I'm going to output whatever answer is. So 14 and 3, 17, so the answer would be 17. Then the exact same thing's going to happen. Only this time it's going to send 2 and 54. It's going to add them together. It's going to come back and say 56. Then it's going to output 56. And it's going to do the same for these others. So what happens is, now I've had it call it several times. You can call this method from anywhere. Absolutely anywhere in the program. Even within itself. A method that calls itself is called recursion. And that's a kind of a difficult topic to explain. But let me give you the gist of it real quick. I'm not going to actually do an example here, but let me just explain to you the basics. Imagine you're in a movie theater and somebody says, hey, what's your seat number? What row are you on? And you don't know what row you're on. So you ask the guy in front of you, you say, hey, buddy, what row are you on? Because you're just going to add one to whatever he says. And the guy in front of you goes, I don't know. Hold on. And he asks the person in front of him. He says, hey, what row are you on? And that person says, I'm on row 2. And he says, oh, okay, that means I'm on row 3. And then he comes back to you and you say, oh, okay, I'm on row 4. That's the basics for recursion. That's all that's going to happen is it's going to keep going. It's going to keep circling and circling until it finds the answer. Then it's going to go back the other way and keep giving the answers. It's not a fun topic to play with, and it's something that you're not going to use in very many programs, but I just wanted to touch on the fact that it is possible for you to call a function from within itself. So, anyway, I hope this has been helpful to you, and join us in our next section.